Hello and welcome to Cliff Reviews Art House. This time I'm reviewing the film Occupied City, directed by Steve McQueen. So the starting point for this film is the book Atlas of an Occupied City, Amsterdam 1940 to 1945, authored by Bianca Steater, who is McQueen's wife. Now Steater's book documents stories from Amsterdam buildings and locations during the Nazi occupation. And the basic concept for Occupied City is that McQueen took the book and filmed 36 hours of footage of all these locations, creating a kind of systematic documentation of every address in Amsterdam mentioned in the book. The narration of stories in the film is taken from the book, and the stories are specific to each of the addresses that we see in the film. I think in total in the book there's about 2,000 sites, and as I say, McQueen shot 36 hours of footage. I really like this concept. It's very effective. It's kind of very psychogeography. It's like and what really works for me is the juxtaposition of contemporary views of Amsterdam with the resonance of the specific history that we're told about for each location. It reminded me of an excellent artwork that I saw by Susan Hiller in London last year, the J Street Project. Hiller went round Germany photographing signs of street names that had the word Jew in it. And these signs were removed during the Nazi period, but in many cases they've been put back. So she mapped every one of these streets and produced a wall of 303 colour photographs. So there was an obvious comparison with this film. Watching this film is like an exercise in endurance. There is no narrative thread. It's almost 4.5 hours of the same thing. It's definitely not for everyone. I would say it's kind of more of an artwork than a feature film. I'm not sure if it would work better in a gallery, actually. In fact, I think it would, being shown on a loop where people don't necessarily have to watch the whole thing. So I did watch the whole thing like a feature film, and at the end of it, I was kind of left with mixed feelings about whether it's necessary to watch the whole thing or whether you can get everything from one part of it. As I say, it was an exercise in endurance, and on a good day, I am up for that. It's like a performance artwork that requires patience and endurance to view it, to participate in it. But then there is a reward at the end. And Occupied City, for me, did turn into a kind of meditation. That said, I think that I possibly could have got the whole point of the work by walking into a gallery and watching any random 10 to 20 minutes of it. I don't think that it's a reference work where you have to take in all of the information. It's an idea, a concept, allowing you to reflect on Amsterdam today with the resonance of that awful history. There are some really nice touches. These aren't just random shots. He's really composed a lot of these shots well. I loved the kind of live sex show notice with a cash machine underneath built into a door. And we're hearing the story of a bridge and we see the underside of a bridge. It's a kind of unremarkable shot. But then the bridge goes down and we realise that we're looking through the window of a bus waiting for the bridge to go back down. This was really another really nice touch. There's another shot which is shot on a train station, which has got kind of layers, the platform, the train, the roof, and there's a container train comes through in front of the other train, and it's got no containers on it, so it's flat, and it creates a kind of interesting effect as it passes in front of the train stopped in the station. It adds this other layer as if the part of the train has started moving. I really like that. There's one point where the narration talks about a train to one of the camps, and it shows an empty train, and perhaps that the train is like a ghost, and in some ways this is when the film works best. You see potential meanings, and it's aesthetically compelling too, based on these mundane images. The narration is perfect. It's very matter of fact. There's no emotion in it. It more than speaks for itself. There is music in this film. A lot of it is diegetic, that it's within the film. But there is also a quiet, gentle score that comes in times. It is subtle and it's not manipulative, but I think this works well. Again, the content speaks for itself. It doesn't need emotional music. In such a long film, there is an opportunity to do lots of different things and really give the subject matter space to breathe. And I think that McQueen does this quite well. Sometimes it focuses on young people who are just blissfully unaware of the things that may have happened in the exact space they were occupying. Other times it might focus on an older person who may well have been alive. Of course, they would have been children, but it is possible that they've lived in both periods. In most cases, the people filmed today are kind of filmed, they're unaware, there's no explicit awareness of what happened at the location that they're filmed at. But there is one point when there is a kind of crossover between the two periods where we see a TV presenter describing a strike that took place in 1941 against the persecution of the Jews. And the strike was harshly suppressed in this particular location where the report was being given. And I thought that was an interesting touch. On the whole, this film did feel like a worthwhile watch. It does have its flaws. For example, as I've said, I'm not sure about the length. And there were other issues that came up for me. The film works at its best when it's showing unrelated footage from today, which is set against the narrated history. It has a simplicity, the matter-of-fact narration set against modern-day events that may or may not be a parallel. And I think that the extent to which it is a parallel will vary for different viewers. I think there's a lot of scope for interpreting connections between what we're hearing and what we're seeing. I think things become more complex when explicit links are made with contemporary events and the narration. So we get several examples of this. Firstly, when there's a talk on slavery, it seems to be making some explicit links. Then there's also some kind of memorial event where explicit links are made. And perhaps the clumsiest thing is that, for me at least, it was filmed during the time when COVID measures were in place. And so there's a contrast between what we're hearing in the narration and these anti-COVID demonstrations. And I think that the film is explicitly kind of hinting that the lockdowns were a kind of occupation of sorts. We see shops boarded up, we see police horses. It just becomes a little bit obvious. And I did wonder if this was just a bit crass parallels compared to the simplicity and the ambiguity in the way that the film is made as a whole. I guess in terms of the COVID stuff, the anti-COVID, it depends on your view of lockdown. If you see the lockdown as like highly oppressive, then maybe the comparison really works for you. But I just think that this complexity didn't quite work for me compared to the rest of the film. In the closing scene, we're in a synagogue and there's a mixed race family where the son is going through some kind of ritual. And I can't decide whether this is making a really obvious and again clumsy point about the joining of two minorities that have gone through a lot of suffering, or whether it's just a really good place to bring the film to an end on a more optimistic note. I just wasn't sure about this scene. Again, though, it's much more complex than just the simple concept of most of this film. Another thing on which I wasn't sure was there were several points at which McQueen filmed people inside their houses. So the story we had was it fitted with the inside of the house. but we actually saw people who were, you know, of course they would have been aware of the camera there. I think for me, the images worked best when the people in the shot were unaware of being filmed. They were just mundane shots. Whereas we see a woman dancing in a kitchen and we see someone sitting at a desk, and you can, there again, there is a kind of explicit link between the narrated history and this contemporary image where the person is aware of the camera. I just didn't think this had the same simplicity. I would say it's hard to recommend this film or not. If you like this kind of thing, it's definitely worth watching. However, it is possible that 10 to 20 minutes gives you everything that you need, and 4.5 hours becomes overkill. I would only recommend it if you're ready to treat it like an endurance meditation or a contemplative experience. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.